question of whether Eva Braun would have faced charges at Nuremberg invites a careful distinction between moral proximity to the Nazi regime and legal responsibility under the framework that governed the post-war trials. Nuremberg was not designed as a sweeping moral reckoning of everyone associated with Adolf Hitler, but as a criminal tribunal with defined jurisdiction, evidentiary standards, and a focus on individual culpability. Assessing Braun's hypothetical legal fate therefore requires examining who she was, what the prosecutors at Nuremberg were empowered to punish, and how those standards were applied in practice. Eva Braun's historical role is relatively narrow. She was Adolf Hitler's longtime companion, and for the final day of their lives, his wife. She lived largely in the shadows, excluded from formal political life and from the public image of the Führer that the Nazi leadership carefully curated. Her daily existence revolved around Hitler's private world at the Berghof and later the bunker in Berlin. There is no evidence that she held an official position in the Nazi Party, the German state, the SS, or the military. She did not issue orders, command subordinates, or appear in the chain of decision-making that produced aggressive war, mass murder, or systematic persecution. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg had a specific mandate. It prosecuted major war criminals for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Central to these categories was the notion of personal responsibility. Defendants were charged because they planned, ordered, facilitated, or knowingly participated in criminal acts. The tribunal explicitly rejected the idea of collective guilt, even while recognizing the broader criminality of the Nazi system. Merely belonging to a criminal organization was not enough for conviction, unless accompanied by knowledge and participation, and even then such cases were handled carefully. Under this framework, Braun's proximity to Hitler alone would not have sufficed to bring her before the tribunal. The prosecutors focused on figures such as Göring, Ribbentrop, Keitel, and others who exercised power within the state or military apparatus. Even among Hitler's inner circle, not everyone was indicted. Some senior figures were excluded because they were dead, others because evidence of direct criminal responsibility was lacking, or because they fell outside the tribunal's priorities. The emphasis was on those who had shaped policy and implemented crimes on a massive scale. One possible avenue for charging Braun would have been as an accessory or accomplice, on the theory that she knowingly supported or facilitated Hitler's crimes. This, however, would have required proof that she did more than share his private life. Knowledge alone, even if established, was not treated as sufficient for criminal liability at Nuremberg. Many Germans knew, at least in part, what the regime was doing. The tribunal did not attempt to criminalize passive awareness. What mattered was active contribution. There is no credible evidence that Braun encouraged genocidal policies, participated in their administration, or used her proximity to Hitler to influence decisions in a criminal direction. Another possibility would have been prosecution for membership in a criminal organization, such as the Nazi Party or affiliated groups. Braun was not a member of the SS or the party leadership, while she lived in a world saturated with Nazi ideology and benefited from her association with Hitler. This again falls short of the legal thresholds applied at Nuremberg. Even many party members were not prosecuted unless they held significant responsibility or committed specific crimes. Comparisons with other women prosecuted after the war are instructive. Female concentration camp guards such as Irma Grace were tried and executed because they personally committed acts of brutality and murder. Their gender and relative youth did not shield them, because their individual actions clearly constituted war crimes and crimes against humanity. Braun's situation was fundamentally different. She was not present at camps, did not oversee forced labor, and did not participate in violence. Her life, however morally compromised, was not one of direct perpetration. Some might argue that Braun played a role in sustaining Hitler psychologically, offering companionship that enabled him to continue leading the regime. This argument, while emotionally compelling, would have been legally weak. Criminal law generally does not punish emotional support or personal relationships absent a clear link to criminal acts. The Nuremberg prosecutors were acutely aware that stretching liability too far would undermine the tribunal's legitimacy and make it appear vindictive rather than judicial. It is also important to consider the political and symbolic aims of Nuremberg. The trials were meant to establish a historical and legal record of Nazi criminality, to delegitimize the regime, and to lay foundations for international criminal law. Bringing Eva Braun to trial would have contributed little to these goals. She was not a policymaker or an ideologue. Prosecuting her might have been seen as sensationalistic, blurring the line between serious criminal responsibility and guilt by association. The tribunal already faced criticism from some quarters as victor's justice, and it took pains to emphasize procedural fairness and restraint. Had Braun survived the war, she almost certainly would have been interrogated. Allied authorities questioned countless individuals connected to the Nazi leadership, not only to assess culpability, but also to gather information. It is plausible that she could have faced denazification proceedings or temporary detention, as many Germans did. These processes were administrative and political rather than criminal, aimed at assessing an individual's level of involvement with the regime. Even there, Braun's lack of formal role would likely have placed her in a lower category, subject perhaps to restrictions but not severe punishment. The absence of evidence is crucial. Nuremberg relied heavily on documents, orders, minutes, and correspondence. Hitler's private life generated little of this kind of material. Braun did not sign directives or attend conferences where mass murder was planned. Without documentary or testimonial proof of active participation, a case against her would have been exceedingly difficult to construct. None of this absolves Braun in a moral sense. Living intimately with Hitler, enjoying privilege and comfort while millions suffered, and remaining loyal to him until the end can reasonably be judged as ethically reprehensible. Moral judgment, however, was not the same as legal guilt at Nuremberg. The tribunal was careful to insist on that distinction, both to maintain legal credibility and to avoid the appearance of punishing people simply for who they were connected to. In the end, the most likely conclusion is that Eva Braun would not have faced charges at Nuremberg. She fell outside the core categories of defendants the tribunal was designed to prosecute. Absent evidence of direct involvement in crimes, she would not have met the legal standards required for indictment or conviction. Her fate, had she lived, would probably have resembled that of many peripheral figures: scrutiny, questioning, perhaps social condemnation, but not a place in the dock alongside the architects of war and genocide. The question nevertheless remains valuable, because it highlights the limits of criminal law in responding to mass atrocity. Nuremberg established that those who wield power and commit crimes can be held personally accountable. It also implicitly acknowledged that not every morally compromised individual can or should be prosecuted. Eva Braun stands at that boundary, emblematic of how proximity to evil does not automatically translate into legal culpability, even when history judges such proximity harshly.